Rick's group survives gunfights, cannibals, and a literal tiger, but somehow nobody stops to ask why they keep trusting a fence you could cut through with garden shears. The Walking Dead builds entire story arcs around shelters that would crumble under basic scrutiny, and today, we're tearing apart 8 structural myths the show sold you as survival gospel, starting with the one that falls first: choosing flimsy chain link fences. Here's the thing about The Walking Dead's obsession with chain link fences. The show treats them like they're one step below the walls of Fort Knox. Characters find a fence, reinforce it with a few wooden pallets, and suddenly everyone sleeps soundly. The prison arc is the worst offender. That standard chain link becomes the backbone of their entire survival strategy for months, and nobody questions it. But here's where it gets weird. Standard commercial chain link fencing, the exact 2-inch mesh stuff you see on screen, can be breached by 2 people with basic hand tools in under 26 minutes. That includes buried fabric with stone backfill. The unburied version, about 11 minutes. That's not a wall, that's a suggestion. Now, walkers aren't using bolt cutters. Fair point. But what they are doing is arguably worse from a structural perspective. A herd pressing against a fence creates sustained lateral pressure across dozens of contact points for hours, sometimes days. The show depicts this constantly. Walkers leaning, pushing, piling against the prison fence while characters casually poke them through the mesh with sharpened rebar. And somehow, the posts hold. The fabric stays taut. Turns out, number metal fatigues under cyclic loading. Posts loosen in their concrete footings. The fabric stretches and deforms at stress points. Without routine tightening and replacement of compromised sections, a chain link fence under constant walker pressure isn't a barrier. It's a countdown timer. And here's what the show never addresses: maintenance. Real correctional facilities that rely on chain link run scheduled inspections and documented repair protocols. The prison looks abandoned when Rick's group arrives, yet somehow its fencing performs like it was installed last Tuesday. Nobody reconcretes a loose post. Nobody buries the bottom fabric. Nobody even mentions rust. The most dangerous myth here isn't that chain link is worthless, it's that chain link alone is sufficient. Any group serious about long-term survival would need earth berms to absorb impact energy, concrete barriers at the base, or layered obstacle systems, preventing walkers from ever reaching the primary fence in concentrated numbers. The show skips all of this, because a clean fence line looks better on camera than an ugly but functional defense-in-depth system, which means every time you see Rick's group calmly gardening 30 feet from a fence with 200 walkers pressed against it, you're watching people who should be building secondary barriers, and instead chose to plant tomatoes. I don't know what to tell you, but at least a fence, however flimsy, gives you some warning before things go sideways. The next problem the show ignores won't even give you that courtesy, ignoring structural blind spots and clear zones. Here's something that should be obvious to anyone who's ever played a tower defense game. You need to see what's coming. That's it. That's the whole philosophy behind clear zones, which are open areas surrounding your perimeter, free of vegetation, debris, vehicles, anything that blocks your line of sight. Every military installation, every prison, every high-security facility on Earth maintains them. The Walking Dead apparently never heard of the concept. Let's start with the prison. When Rick's group first arrives, the yard is relatively open, but over time, they let internal sheds, stacked supplies, and improvised structures clutter the space until defenders can barely see from one end of the compound to the other. Outside the fence, tree lines creep right up to the perimeter. Walkers could be massing 30 feet away and nobody would know until they heard the chain link groaning. And that's exactly what happens. Repeatedly. The Killer Within episode is basically a masterclass in what blind spots do to you. Andrew exploits the fact that nobody has clear oversight of internal movement paths, releases walkers into the compound, and suddenly defenders are scrambling through corridors where every corner is a potential death sentence. The interior becomes a series of isolated kill boxes with zero overlapping surveillance. People die. But here's the thing, they never fix this. They never clear the tree line back 50 meters. They never demolish those internal sheds blocking sight lines. They just keep getting surprised. Alexandria is somehow worse. Houses, mature trees, parked vehicles, and garden fences creating dozens of concealment points right up against the walls. Defenders on the ground can't see anything approaching until it's already pressing against the barrier. That's how entire herds materialize seemingly out of nowhere. They didn't teleport. They just walked up behind a row of oak trees in a minivan, completely invisible until the last 20 feet. The noise attraction feedback loop makes all of this exponentially worse. Walkers hear activity, move toward it. Their collective shuffling attracts more walkers, and suddenly you've got a herd forming against your perimeter that you can't see because you never bothered clearing the vegetation. By the time you spot them, you're looking at 200 bodies instead of 20. Real defensive design solves this with layered observation, elevated positions with defined sectors, cleared zones extending 50 to 100 meters from barriers, overlapping overlapping fields of view, so no single point goes unmonitored. Noise decoys positioned at distance to redirect forming herds away from walls. The survivors do almost none of this, despite losing the prison partly because of blind spots. Despite Alexandria getting breached because herds massed unseen, they move to each new location and repeat the same pattern. Tall walls, zero visibility beyond them, cluttered interiors. No systematic observation plan, at least a blind spot only blocks your vision. The next problem with their shelters? It blocks nothing at all. The myth of the unreinforced wood door. Let's talk about something that has bothered me for years. In The Walking Dead, characters slam a door shut, maybe shove a bookshelf against it, and then proceed to have entire conversations while walkers pound on the other side. Sometimes they plan elaborate escape routes. Sometimes they argue about philosophy. Sometimes they take a nap, and that door just holds. Here's the thing. Most doors in residential homes are hollow core interior units. Two thin veneers over a lightweight cardboard honeycomb center. They exist for privacy. That's it. You could punch through one if you were angry enough and had a reasonable calcium intake. They are not defensive barriers. They are glorified room dividers, but The Walking Dead treats them like bank vault doors with a fresh coat of paint. Think about every scene where walkers press against a standard wood door, piling their collective weight into it. The door itself might hold briefly, but the frame wouldn't. Standard strike plates are secured with half-inch screws into soft pine framing. 3 adults leaning hard would pop most residential locks out of the jam entirely. Now multiply that by 15 decomposing bodies with zero concept of personal space, and you've got a breach measured in seconds, not minutes. Yet on screen, these doors buy characters 10, sometimes 15 minutes of uninterrupted dialogue time, which is, not ideal for realism. And then there's the barricading myth. Someone drags a dresser across the floor, wedges a chair under the handle, and suddenly everyone relaxes. In practice, furniture barricades are unstable, often top-heavy, and can actually make things worse by blocking your own escape route. You've created a single exit bottleneck and given yourself a false sense of security. That's a 2-for-1 deal on bad decisions. Hey, let me just bar this door real quick. Great. You've bought yourself about 4 seconds and eliminated your only exit. Tactical genius. The inconsistency is what really sells it. Glass storefront doors shatter immediately under minimal walker pressure, which makes sense. But a standard wood door in a suburban house somehow outperforms them. The frame, the hinges, the lock hardware, none of it is rated for sustained lateral force from multiple bodies. A door without a steel skin and reinforced frame would fold like cardboard under that battering, because part of it literally is cardboard. Fan communities have noticed this. Door durability fluctuates wildly based on what the plot needs. Sometimes a single walker breaks through in seconds. Other times, a full horde can't breach one for an entire scene. The material hasn't changed. Only the script's need for tension or breathing room has changed. In a real scenario, any group that understood material science would recognize that standard doors are delay devices measured in single-digit seconds. They'd retrofit with steel plates, replace strike plates with 3-inch screw versions, and install multi-point locks. Or they'd stop treating doors as defensive positions altogether and focus on creating distance instead of barriers. But that wouldn't give anyone time for a dramatic monologue. So here we are. If you think overestimating a wooden door is dangerous, wait until you see what happens when survivors think heading upstairs in a high-rise is a good idea. Underestimating urban high-rise traps. Here's something that has always bugged me about The Walking Dead. The show spends an entire pilot episode establishing Atlanta as this dense urban nightmare. Rick rides in on horseback, gets swarmed, nearly dies, and from that point forward, the entire group basically decides that cities are death sentences, which, is one way to interpret the experience. But it's also kind of lazy, because here's the thing, high-rise buildings are not just vertical death cages. They're some of the most defensible structures on the planet if you use them correctly. Walkers can't climb ladders. They can barely handle stairs in large numbers without creating a pileup. A group occupying floors 6 through 10 of a mid-rise apartment building, with the stairwells blocked below floor 5, is essentially untouchable by ground-level threats. You've got vantage points in every direction, natural isolation from herds, rooftop escape potential, and zero walkers knocking on your door unless someone lets them in. But the show never explores this. Not once. Instead, every urban encounter follows the same formula. Characters enter building. Building seems safe. Building gets breached. Characters flee at ground level through walker-filled streets. The Atlanta department store, the nursing home, the CDC, they all follow this exact pattern. Buildings are treated as temporary hiding spots that inevitably fail, never as strategic positions worth fortifying. The CDC is particularly frustrating frustrating because it fails for purely plot-driven reasons. The building itself is essentially a fortress. Controlled entry, reinforced doors, independent power systems. It doesn't fall because of structural faults. It falls because one guy programmed it to explode. That's not an architecture problem. That's a screenplay problem. The bell tower sequence in the Telltale game at least acknowledges that vertical movement is terrifying when infrastructure is damaged. A one-armed man climbing a rickety ladder that could snap at any moment, that's genuinely tense. But even there, the ladder is treated as desperate improvisation rather than part of any systematic vertical strategy. Nobody in this franchise ever says, hey, what if we installed permanent rope systems between these rooftops? Or let's barricade the stairwell at floor 2. Those conversations simply don't exist. And the missed opportunities compound. Survivors never occupy upper floors strategically. Nobody builds rope bridges between adjacent buildings. Nobody establishes rooftop gardens where walkers literally cannot reach. The show's entire approach to urban environments can be summarized as we went to Atlanta once. It was bad, never again, which reinforces this simplistic narrative that countryside equals safety and cities equal death. In practice, a carefully chosen mid-rise building with limited stairwell access points would offer massive tactical advantages. Height gives you early warning of approaching herds. Limited entry points are a benefit when you control them deliberately. Rooftops provide space for water collection, signaling, and emergency evacuation to neighboring structures. The real danger of high-rises isn't that they're inherently deadly, it's that they require planning to use correctly. You need to map every stairwell, seal lower floors, establish multiple escape routes, and maintain those systems over time. That's work. And apparently, in The Walking Dead's universe, nobody wants to do that work when you could just find another farm with a nice porch. But if you think ignoring vertical strategy is a problem, wait until you hear how badly these survivors handle something even more fundamental to staying alive: overlooking long-term water and sanitation logistics. Here's something nobody ever talks about with The Walking Dead, and honestly, it might be the single biggest survival oversight in the entire series. You can have the tallest walls, the deepest weapons cache, and enough farmland to feed a small army. None of it matters if everyone's dying of cholera because nobody figured out where the sewage goes. Water and sanitation, the invisible infrastructure that keeps civilizations alive, and The Walking Dead treats it like it simply doesn't exist. Every single person in a community needs a bare minimum of 2 to 3 liters of clean drinking water per day just for hydration. Factor in cooking, wound cleaning, and basic hygiene, and you're looking at dramatically more. For a community the size of Alexandria, that's an enormous daily demand, and it needs to be actually purified, not scooped from the nearest creek. Alexandria is the one location where the show acknowledges modern utilities exist. Running water, flush toilets, the whole suburban fantasy somehow still functioning years into the apocalypse. But here's the thing, pumps need electricity. Water treatment requires chemicals and technical knowledge. Sewage systems depend on intact pipe networks and functional processing downstream. Without professional maintenance, every single one of these systems degrades fast. The show never once addresses who's maintaining any of it. It just works, apparently, because the plot needs people clean enough for close-up shots. The prison is somehow worse. Real correctional facilities have complex centralized plumbing designed for institutional populations. The group moves into cell blocks that have been sitting dormant since the outbreak began, and within episodes they're living there like everything functions perfectly. We see characters establishing gardens for food production. Great, but not a single scene of anyone building a latrine system or discussing what happens when the pipes inevitably clog with years of accumulated neglect. The hilltop gets even less attention. Where are these people going to the bathroom? Where's the water coming from? How are they disposing of waste for dozens of residents without contaminating their own living space? The show simply doesn't say, and this silence isn't just a minor omission. In every real-world disaster scenario, water and sanitation failure is the primary driver of mass illness and death. Dysentery, typhoid, parasitic infections. These kill more people after disasters than the disasters themselves. A community with perfect walls and zero sanitation planning would be decimated within months. Not by walkers, by their own waste. But here's where it gets frustrating. The show dedicates entire arcs to food production, trade negotiations, and ammunition supply chain. Water purification and waste management, which are arguably more immediately lethal when neglected, get nothing. Which is, not how any of this works. Fans have noticed. Community discussions consistently flag this as one of the show's most unrealistic optimisms. Poor sanitation doesn't just cause disease. It tanks morale, breeds conflict, and accelerates accelerates social breakdown. Every advantage Alexandria and the prison supposedly offer gets quietly undermined by the infrastructure nobody's maintaining beneath their feet. But at least dirty water kills you slowly. The next problem is one that attracts things that kill you fast, because apparently nobody in this universe has heard of soundproofing. Neglecting soundproofing and noise bleed. Here's the thing about The Walking Dead's universe. Noise kills. This is established in literally the first episode. Rick fires a gun in Atlanta, and within minutes, an entire horde descends on a department store full of survivors. The show hammers this rule into you over and over. Sound attracts walkers. Walkers attract more walkers. It's a feedback loop that can turn a single shout into a 1,000-strong herd pressing against your walls. So you'd think someone would eventually say, hey, maybe we should put some insulation on these walls. Nobody does. Walk through Alexandria at any point in the series. Characters argue at full volume inside houses with open windows. They run generators that hum and rattle constantly. They hammer nails and saw wood within earshot of walker-infested wilderness, and the show just lets it happen. No consequences. The noise attraction rule applies exclusively when the writers need tension and vanishes completely when they need domestic scenes. But here's where it gets complicated. Basic soundproofing isn't some lost technology. Heavy curtains, doubled-up drywall, packed earth against exterior walls, moving your generator into a buried enclosure 50 meters from the perimeter. These aren't engineering marvels. A moderately handy person with access to a hardware store, which nobody else is using, could meaningfully reduce a building's acoustic signature in a weekend. Yet across multiple communities, zero effort is made toward noise discipline as an architectural priority. The generator issue alone is baffling. Those things are loud. In a world where ambient noise has dropped to essentially nothing, no traffic, no planes, no industrial hum, a running generator would be audible from hundreds of meters away on a quiet night. That's basic physics. Alexandria runs power constantly. The lights are on. The water heaters work. Something is broadcasting their location to every walker in a wide radius. Nobody builds an acoustic enclosure. Nobody even moves it to the far side of the community. The show also never establishes quiet hours or noise zoning, concepts that any group genuinely terrified of sound-attracted threats would develop almost immediately. You'd put your workshop on the interior. You'd schedule loud construction for specific windows. You'd keep noisy activities centralized and insulated. These are organizational solutions, not even construction projects, and they're completely absent. What makes this particularly frustrating is that the show clearly understands the dramatic power of sound. Every tense scene relies on it. The creak of a floorboard, the distant moan of a herd, the sudden crack of a gunshot that changes everything. But that mastery exists entirely on the production side. Inside the fiction, characters treat their shelters as acoustically invisible. Apparently sound only travels when it's dramatically convenient. The missed opportunity goes beyond realism. Imagine the tension of a scene where characters have to perform a loud repair, knowing they have limited time before walkers respond. Imagine a generator's acoustic housing failing, suddenly broadcasting to everything nearby. Sound management could be a source of constant narrative pressure. Instead, it's a rule the show remembers only when it needs a horde to appear from nowhere. But if you think ignoring invisible threats like noise is bad, wait until you see how these communities handle the very visible problem of having only one way out when things go wrong, the danger of single-exit bottlenecks. Here's a fun exercise. Think about every single time a group in The Walking Dead nearly dies inside a building. Now ask yourself how many of those situations would have been solved by a back door. The answer is almost all of them. And yet, season after season, these people keep walking into spaces with one way in and one way out, then act surprised when that one way gets filled with teeth. Single-exit bottlenecks are arguably the most lethal recurring architectural flaw in this entire show, and nobody ever learns from them. Terminus is the most egregious example. The entire rail yard complex is designed, literally designed, to funnel newcomers through narrow corridors into kill zones. You walk in along guided paths, pass through enclosed platforms, and before you realize what's happening, armed cannibals have you boxed in with zero options. The layout itself does the work. You don't need a lot of people to trap someone when the architecture is doing the trapping for you. It's a murder funnel disguised as a sanctuary. But here's the thing. The group barely escapes Terminus alive, and then proceeds to learn absolutely nothing from the experience. The prison is just as bad. Cell blocks and corridors have limited doorways, which is fine when you control all the gates. The moment you don't, those same features become death sentences. In Killer Within, walkers flood the yard and cell blocks simultaneously, and characters are left scrambling through tight hallways, where a single clogged doorway cuts entire groups off from safety. People die because there's nowhere to go. Not because they weren't fast enough, but because the building only gave them one option, and that option disappeared. Real-world building codes exist specifically to prevent this. The pre-apocalypse prison would have had multiple independent egress routes built in, but the survivors' modifications sections, locking off sections, barricading doors, repurposing corridors, inadvertently create new bottlenecks that didn't exist before. They're making the building more dangerous while thinking they're making it safer, which is, not ideal. Then there's the CDC. The group gets locked inside by automated protocols and nearly dies when the self-destruct sequence activates, and every exit is sealed. They escape through a window, barely, and the whole place detonates behind them. You'd think that experience would permanently rewire their approach to shelter selection, but no, they move on to the next constrained location and repeat the pattern. What makes this particularly frustrating is how bottlenecks compound with every other flaw we've discussed. A single exit combined with a weak door means one failure point kills everyone. A single exit combined with a blind spot means you won't see the threat until it's blocking your only way out. Stack enough of these together and you don't have a shelter anymore. You have a coffin with better lighting. The show is optimizing for drama at the direct expense of survival logic. A character running down a corridor with walkers behind them and only one door ahead is inherently more tense than a character calmly choosing between 4 escape routes. Fair enough, it's television. But the pattern reveals that these survivors never redesign their spaces to prevent the next crisis. No one sits down with a map and says we need at least 2 independent ways out of every occupied area. The trauma just accumulates without producing architectural adaptation. The CDC taught them nothing. Terminus taught them nothing. The prison taught them nothing. But if you think getting trapped horizontally is bad, wait until you realize they're also ignoring one of the simplest vertical escape tools available in literally every hardware store in America, failing to utilize vertical ladder access. Here's the thing about every shelter flaw we've covered so far. The fences, the blind spots, the doors, the bottlenecks, they all share one common thread. They're ground-level problems being solved with ground-level thinking. And that's exactly where this final issue lives, except the solution is literally right above everyone's heads the entire time. Walkers can't climb ladders. They can barely navigate stairs. A simple fixed ladder bolted to the side of a building turns any roof into an instant safe room. Connect 2 rooftops with a plank or a basic bridge, and you've got cross-building movement that completely ignores whatever nightmare is happening at street level. This isn't theoretical. Real defensive architecture has used vertical layering for thousands of years. Castles, fortresses, walled cities, they all understood that controlling the vertical dimension gives you options that ground-level movement simply cannot provide, and the materials are everywhere. Construction sites, hardware stores, fire stations. You could scavenge enough ladders in a single afternoon to create a network linking every key building in a compound. The labor is moderate. The payoff is enormous. Yet across multiple seasons and multiple communities, almost nobody thinks to do it. The prison has towers. It has catwalks. It has elevated walkways. And yet, when breaches happen, when walkers pour into the yard or cell blocks get compromised, everyone runs along the ground, through corridors, past the exact threats they're trying to escape. Nobody scrambles up a pre-installed ladder to a rooftop, because those systems simply don't exist in any deliberate, integrated way. The closest the show gets is posting snipers on watchtowers, which completely misses the broader application. Vertical access isn't just about seeing threats. It's about moving away from them. It's about having a plan B that doesn't involve fighting through a hallway full of walkers. What makes this particularly frustrating as a final note is how it connects to everything else. Blind spots? Elevated positions eliminate them? Single exit bottlenecks? A roof ladder is an instant second exit. Weak doors? Irrelevant if you're already 2 stories up with the ladder pulled behind you. Vertical access doesn't just solve its own problem. It mitigates half the other problems on this list. But in The Walking Dead, ladders remain what they've always been. Anxiety props. Momentary tools grabbed in desperation. Never infrastructure. Never strategy. And that, more than any single wall or fence, represents the show's deepest misunderstanding of what shelter actually means. It's not just about keeping threats out horizontally, it's about owning every dimension of the space you occupy, which, is a lot to ask of people running from zombies. But still, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.